I've commented a number of times that this is the tamest book I will ever write. Primarily just because when I wrote it, I was experimenting with what I could put into a book and that people would take seriously and buy. And so I just wrote on the subject I had the most professional experience with, which was sales and branding and small business identity development. There's many ways you could describe this process. And the book turned out to be pretty successful for a first-time self-published author. And then after that is when I started challenging myself to say, what else can I write about that people will take seriously and buy? Now that I know that writing books is a viable option, where else can I take this? And that's a journey I'm still on now, 8 years later. Constantly trying to, with every new book I write, it's where else can I take this? How deep can I go with a new subject or deeper into a subject I've already written about? I was always a good writer, but I'd never tried to write long form more than a few thousand words on anything. So that was a new challenge. Um, and right away it became clear, I had to have a reason. I was in my late 20s when I wrote this, and I didn't have much of a brand name for myself, ironically. So there had to be a reason. Why are complete strangers going to buy and take seriously a book on branding from some kid, basically, because there are people much older than me who much more experience working in branding and sales for major corporations. Why would
You
someone
were
listen to
what
me?
age when this was published?
27. And the answer I came up with pretty quickly, which was confirmed by beta readers and early readers, was that I have a way of explaining things on a deeper level than other people. Many
That's part of your
dozens.
brand identity.
Yeah, now it is. Now it is as a writer. That's even in my author bio, actually, the most recent iteration of it, which I wrote, of course, but I specifically decided that that should be some way that people identify and recognize me, especially because now I write on so many different subjects, right? So I can't just say I'm the business author, I have to focus more on the way I write and the kind of person I am. And so my current author bio says Gregory V. Diehl understands the transformative power of the right book in the right hands. He writes with the hopes that his work will make its way to those who need it, deep thinkers unsatisfied with ordinary approaches to important subjects. His work often deconstructs and challenges cultural narratives that keep people from establishing and embodying who they really are. So, yes, I write for deep
Very good,
thinkers.
sir.
Thank you. Unsatisfied with ordinary approaches to important subjects, which is another way of saying I write more deeply than is commonly expected about even subjects that might not seem very deep, like sales and branding. Like that almost seems like a solved science, like people have been writing great books on this subject for many, many decades now. So what new thing am I going to bring to the table? That's a legitimate question, right? I would say the biggest thing, the focus of this book, which I've now taken to a much more personal level too, that extends way beyond just business. And in fact, maybe someday it wouldn't be out of the question for me to write a book that's more about your self brand, which is different than a personal brand. A personal brand is how people think of you as a person, which is kind of contained in small business branding. A self brand, I would say, is how you think of yourself, or what in the Matrix they called a residual self image. You know how when they show up in the Matrix for the first time and Neo has his hair back and the whole plugs are gone and he says, "Oh, why do I look different in the Matrix?" And Morpheus says to him, "It's residual self-image. It's the image you have of yourself. That's how you show up in the Matrix." So that's kind of what I'm talking about, but it
Hmm.
extends way beyond how you look. It's the kind of person you think of yourself as, what defines you.
So it would be a book purely for self-development, not for self-development to do stuff with others, just to do stuff with yourself.
Well, when two people interact with each other, it's two selves, two images of each other interacting, right? And the goal of branding on any level is for the images to be congruent, consistent. I want the personal brand you have of me, the person you think of me as, to be very consistent with the image I have of myself, right?
When
That's
you
the
say
goal.
two images interact, what do you mean? I get two selves, but two images?
Well, there's the self, which would probably we would call your consciousness or your ego, and there's the image of how people think of you, because how people think of you is not the same thing as you, right? The goal, again, is for those things to be as close as possible. Why would I, obviously, my goal is for people to think of me the way I think of myself, because that's the ideal in my mind. In my case, a literal deal, a Gregory ideal, Gregory deal, yes. You,
The punmeister.
right, everyone is biased, right? We're all inclined to ignore our flaws or, anything negative about ourselves and embellish the positive qualities. So it's not even to say that your self-image is necessarily accurate. You should want it to be if you're a person of integrity, right? You should want your image of yourself to be as accurate as possible. That's why an honest, moral, virtuous person has to spend a lot of time in self-reflection and wonder, am I really the person that I think I am, that I prefer to think of myself as, right? And if you can honestly answer yes to that question through all that time of self-reflection and inquiry and challenging yourself, then of course the goal then is, okay, everyone I now interact with is going to have an image of me. I want that image to be as accurate as possible to what I've determined to be the truth about myself.
And there's also that other people can have, in some ways, a more accurate image of you because you've got blind spots.
Oh yeah,
Presumably, everyone
of
has at least
course.
some
That's why we have mentors or therapists or just people whose advice we trust.
interventions.
Yeah, sure. An intervention is a great example of the people in your life confronting you with a truth that presumably they see more clearly than you do about you, right? That, hey, you have a problem here that you're ignoring. And we're telling you because, hopefully it's because we care about you. And you confront the people you care about with the truth, right? That should be like an implicit contract between all people who are close and care about each other, that you should welcome confrontation of uncomfortable truths from someone you care about and trust, right? If you can't do that, are you really even close with this person? Or are you just sharing the
Hopefully
information
made
together?
as unscarring as possible,
Well, yeah,
rather than them trying to dig the knife in and make it hurt more than it needs to.
yes, there's of course a right and a wrong way to do these things. Um, but I don't think it's
And better and
possible.
worse, not just right and wrong.
Yeah, I don't think it's possible for it not to be at least a little bit uncomfortable, as that's the nature of realizing that you're wrong about something, right? I'm the kind of person where through my whole life, people have either loved or hated me. There's been very little in the middle.
A
And
Marmite man, right?
I can remember in high school, some people when they got to know me, like I can remember some underclassmen when I was like a senior or something, and I was like teaching him how to play the guitar or something and talking to him a lot. And at a certain point, he asked me, Gregory, why do people not like you? And I said, maybe you can tell me sometime why you think that is. He said, because you seem like a really genuinely nice and helpful and honest person. I'm like, yeah, I strive really hard to be that. Even back then, I had a very strong sense of ethics and principles. I mean, I made a lot of fucking mistakes back then, as all teenagers do, but I still always had that core of like a sense of what kind of person I should be, right? And and so even then, I was like a controversial figure among the high school, right? And that's continued well into my adult life with some of the controversial things I write about, some of the things I talk about here in our
Death
media,
threats.
death threats, cultural criticisms. Um, the people
How
who
dare you, bitch bastard!
pasta, that's an
I
Indian
don't know
thing.
if you. Yeah, do you know that one?
Yeah, I think I
Bloody bastard!
right.
You fucking.
Right. It's not far off from the Armenian response. Um, and so to me, that's all just mostly a selection bias. It's what things you're paying attention to, because you could take many things I've done or said out of context and make them out to be something much worse than what they are, or you can miss the intention behind something that seems very negative. And so, of course, people are going to form whatever image they want. of someone like me, or of a controversial movie or book they've never read or seen but feel like they need to have an opinion on. It's the same thing, right? How many people have strong opinions on controversial books they've never read? Where do they get
And
those images
they
from?
have if they have integrity, they'll try to make their images, if you like, match up with what is. So they
Yeah,
won't just shove stuff in based on guesswork and say this is what this person or this thing is. It could be this. I don't know for sure.
right. But
Things are
most people
complex.
can't tell the difference between, well, this is what I hear a lot of people say versus this is what this thing is. What people say is the image, right? You're being influenced by an image, probably from people who also haven't actually experienced the thing they're building an image of, right? So, and the same thing
Wouldn't
is
taking in something someone says about someone be an image of an image? What they
taking,
say is an image, and then you take it into your own mind and
and you
put
add
it as
your
part of
own
your image. So it's an
influence,
image
or
of an
yeah,
image.
it's a
It's
copy
like
of a copy of
Chinese whispers.
matrix within a matrix, simulation within a simulation, however you want to think about it, right? Have you
Inception
ever,
within an inception.
yeah,
I haven't seen that.
it's inceptions all the way down. Have you ever read something, the primary source, the primary text of a philosopher, maybe that people have strong opinions about, for the first time you actually read one of their books or something, and you realize, wow, most people are very wrong about what they think this person's views are on various subjects. That's not what at all what this person was talking about. It's very clearly laid out in the actual text, but everybody says this person teaches this thing or thinks this way, but here in the actual book he wrote, it's very clearly not what he's saying, or not how he meant that to be interpreted, or his motivation behind that. I've done that a lot. And I barely read philosophy. I haven't read most of the famous philosophers, but the ones I have, I'm frequently surprised that the
I
popular
need to get
image of,
around to reading more Aristotle.
yeah, sure. Um,
He the goat.
frequently I find that the popular image, the brand of people who like to think of themselves as like being into philosophy, they're very wrong about some of the people they talk about endlessly. So it's gotten to the point where I now no longer trust the popular brand image, what people say about a subject or a thinker or a speaker, until I've at least read some of the original text or heard this person speak, so that I can compare that to what other people say about this person.
Have you read any like Marx or any of that shit?
I read a little bit of Marx. Um,
And that was all you could stomach.
yeah, I'm yeah, I'd be apprehensive to read more Marx. Actually, I read the Communist Manifesto, which I know is like very short compared to like the much longer things he's written. So proper communists would say, well, that doesn't count. You got to read all these other books, right? Um,
Then
but
you'd say, bruh, it's literally the manifesto.
right, well,
This don't count. What the?
what surprised me about it was just like people, Marxists, proper Marxists claim like, oh, it's a peaceful, nonviolent system. He never advocated violence or anything like that, that some people have misinterpreted him that way. I mean, I'd have to read it again. It's been a while, but it was very clearly advocating violence. It was very clearly like, no, you gotta fucking take everything by force from the people who have all the
They
capital.
don't believe it. Yeah, they just redefine reality so that property doesn't exist. Then it's not take
Right.
because
It's
those
like you're just
people.
you're just defining a
It's
word to mean whatever you want, and therefore,
it was already the collectives. We're just taking it back. Come
right.
on, bruh.
Exactly. It's like there's no way you could read that and not see that it is clearly advocating violence unless you redefine the word violence. But then anything can mean anything. I could be a woman, or my cat could be a dog, or up could be down.
Speaking of misrepresenting things, anything can be anything. Gregory V. Diehl, 2024.
Yeah. Take that out of context, right? So, one thing I have enjoyed very much about learning how to write good books is that it gives me an opportunity to say what I want to say. If someone reads hundreds of pages of something I wrote, they're getting a very good idea of who I actually am as a person, what I actually think, right? Beyond just some other weird biased surface level interpretation, because that's the way I write on a deep level. I don't know how else someone like me could build an accurate brand image, because you can't just have 1 2 minute conversation with me and see what I'm all about. You get a sense of, oh, that guy seems interesting or intelligent. But I go so deep into things that the long form medium of a book is probably the ideal facilitator for that for me until I find something better, which I've struggled with.
That way you get to spend the time unpacking things deeply. It's not just, oh, here's a blast of something deep. Look at this snapshot. It's
Yeah.
like, let's
Yes.
unravel,
I get to
unwind,
cover every thought I think is relevant to what I'm talking about. I've had readers who started reading some of the things I've written, initially thinking they were going to disagree with me largely, but still wanting to see what I had to say. And one said to me recently, your book is really annoying because every time I start to come up with a counter argument to something you're saying, I turn the page and I see you talk extensively about that specific counter argument and then the next 5 counter arguments.
I knew you were going to be saying that.
That's what I read a quote recently from Andrew Galambos where he said, "You
Amazing.
can't argue with a book. A book is a one-way transaction. With if you try to have a conversation with the average person who's even slightly set against whatever you're saying, they will interrupt you 1,000 times and change the subject and say, "Well, what about this thing that you didn't talk about?" And then they'll go off some wild tangent for 2 hours about that thing and forget what you were first talking about. And it becomes almost impossible to build some kind of realistic, logical structure of what the fuck you're talking about. And he said, but with the book, you have hundreds of
Unless
pages.
they trust your expertise and shut up and let you talk and ask
Yeah,
questions where
but
relevant and not
that
try and
requires an enormous amount of
gotcha your
intellectual
ideas.
honesty and someone who actually shares the same goal in the conversation to get to a certain point with you. And yeah, they trust that you're going to take them there, right? Even if it's not in the exact route they would have chosen, or but with a book, they don't have a choice. It's I chose to establish the structure of knowledge in this way, and that's how I'm going to do it. And if you want to go on this journey with me, turn the page, keep going, right? But this is what I have to say. If you want to hear what I have to say, here it is in the book.
Do you ever say in your books like, hold on, I'll be able to demonstrate this and address your counter arguments.
Yes,
Bear with me, I got
yes.
it.
Often that's the kind of thing that comes up in beta reading because you'll see comments that might surprise you where people are confused by something that you thought was pretty clear, or they want to know immediately, like, well, wait a minute, you have to address this thing. Yeah, that comes in chapter 8. No, I need to know now because because
The
otherwise they might
one
stop
time
reading.
people can argue with a book,
Yeah, in beta
they
reading
can
they
argue
can.
with it while
Yes.
it's still beta and
Beta
you can
readers
add
can argue.
comments.
So it's good to at least know those things. If those kinds of comments come up repeatedly, then you know, oh, maybe I should just slightly address that right now in order to encourage people to keep reading. Hey, I'll cover this later, or here's a snapshot, a sneak peek of what I'm going to talk about later, right? What people liked about this book and what made it work, even as my first book, is that it really embellishes and elaborates on the idea that a brand, whether again you're talking about a person or a small business, and also, large businesses too, but that also brings in a whole bunch of new dynamics that I try to avoid the whole corporate world. It's not an image in the strictest sense. It's not a logo or a color scheme or a font. It's a set of values that are supposed to define who you are or what your business is. And those values are supposed to be communicated in your writing style and in your logo and in your color scheme. And so many people approach it backward, which is like, well, what color do you think would look good for my company? As opposed to, well, what am I trying to say? What am I trying to do? What am I trying to accomplish? And then what color would best serve that purpose?
So they're trying to put form before function. So what it looks
Yeah.
like before what it really is on the deep level, the essence of it.
Yeah. And if you do it that way, it's really quite manipulative because really all you're asking is what do you think will get the most clicks or the highest conversion or get the most attention? What color, as opposed to, again, what am I authentically trying to communicate? And then assessing how does that fit with people's expectations and what they actually respond to. You can't ignore that completely, of course. Like I can't put some random bullshit on a book cover and expect it to do the job of looking like a book you'd want to read. It has to look like a business book, right? So you have to identify, oh, that's a business book. I like business books, right?
Sort of snapshot the contents, give them an idea of what it actually is. So
Yeah.
they have some basic level of knowledge of what to expect, which is important. Because if you don't know what to expect from something that you don't have to deal with, why deal with it if it's just pure chaos?
Yes. That's essentially the most important aspect of marketing and sales is setting expectations appropriately. You've probably heard all kinds of advice about like it's better to uh under promise and over deliver than over promise and under deliver because
Definitely
that's the
heard that one.
frame of reference that people are using to make an evaluation. If you expect it to be the greatest fucking sandwich in the world and it was just a pretty good sandwich, you're going to be disappointed. If you're expecting it to be a mediocre sandwich and it's a pretty good sandwich, then oh wow, this was actually pretty good, 5 stars, you know?
But then under promising means people might not bother.
Right. So yeah,
There's the
realistically, it should be
grass.
the promise should be as accurate to reality as possible. But since you're never going to be completely accurate, it's better to err on the side of under promising than over promising. Most of what's in this book, like defining the core values of your business, what makes the value you offer unique and worth paying attention to, noteworthy, what we call a unique selling proposition typically. Um, again, all of this applies to you as a person too. What are the values you want to define you? When you ask someone who they are, what is the typical expected response to that? It's usually like, well, here's the profession I have. Here's where I'm from.
Yeah.
Here's my immediate family arrangement.
Uh,
Here's what I do in my free time. And it's like people are saying those things as a way to distinguish themselves from other people, right? This is what defines
their
me. This is
unique
what
selling
makes me me.
proposition,
Yeah, my
USP.
my USP as an individual, right? And the irony about that, of course, is that most people are just repeating similar types of information that you've heard 1,000 times before, even if the particular arrangement might be different. Well, I'm from this city and I have this many kids and I play this sport on the weekends, right? What sport do you play on the weekends?
God, you
How many
so
kids do you
need to
have?
read The Fountainhead.
And you could really answer that kind of question in an infinite number of ways. Like, who are you is like asking again, what defines you? From your perspective, what defines you? What makes
I
you you?
am what I am.
Uh-huh. And why would you limit that to like what you do on weekends or where you happen to be born, right? How is that the thing that defines you? Why wouldn't it be like, well, here are the things I care about most in life. Here's how I choose to express myself. Here's here are the causes I find most worthwhile. Here's my conception of ethics and virtue. I don't know, like stuff that like that, right? That's what defines you on the deepest level more than other people, right? And if you identify similar values in someone else, like that's grounds for association, friendship, or romance, or working together in some way. So, like instead of, well, we both like playing golf. Oh, I guess we should be friends then. We have that in common, right? Is that enough? Is that all it takes? That you both do the same thing on the weekend? Or
It's
should it
not
be more than that?
nothing. It gives you something to
Sure,
branch
I'd
off
call that a
of and like
buddy.
to share time doing.
I'd call that an activity buddy, which is, yeah, it's not nothing. It's a step above nothing. But if your goal is to be a deep and meaningful person with deep and meaningful relationships, then the standard should be a bit deeper than that, right? Yeah. And then in the level of the business, like, are you going to hire an employee just because they're technically qualified for a position? Or are you going to hire them because their values align with the mission of what you're trying to do with your business? That's ultimately the point I'm building up to in the book, that if you want to really be different, really be meaningful, and it's not just about selling as many products as possible, then those are the kinds of introspective conversations you need to have with yourself. The same kind every individual should have with themselves. A business is an extension of an individual's identity and values. That's something I repeat throughout the book. If you don't know who you are, how could you know what your business is? Which goes back to that point I made previously, that every book I write in some way is about supporting the individual's ability to understand themselves and express themselves as who they are. This is that concept scaled up into a conventional area like a business brand.
Yeah. And so are all your books just kind of different aspects of that then, breaking free of the limits of culture?
Well, I mean, to generalize, yeah, because there's really only two forces at work here. There's your self-expression, and there are things that inhibit that self-expression. And you could generally call the things that inhibit it culture, because culture is defined by unconsciousness, unconscious expectation and acceptance of how things are or are supposed to be, including you, which is part of the reason we get shallow, repetitive answers to questions like, well, who are you? Tell me about yourself. Well, here's where I'm from. Here's how many brothers and
So
sisters.
I'm a Pisces.
Yeah, I'm a Pisces. I'm exactly the same as 1/12 of other people. That's my distinction. We have these pre-established ways we're supposed to think about things, and we depend on those largely to define who we are, which stops us from discovering and expressing who we actually are. You remember how before we were talking about how mythology is like a concentration of the most relevant parts of the truth? If a story were a one-to-one representation of reality, it'd be kind of meaningless, useless, because it'd be just like real life. A good mythological story is the most important parts of reality, the parts that affect us most, that are most noteworthy, concentrated, condensed into a form that makes us experience them in this heightened emotional state, right? That's the whole point of watching a movie or reading a book or something, is to feel emotions that we don't normally feel very much at the slow pace of ordinary life, right? Because they're concentrated. And that's what all communication is. If you think about it, when I use words or images to put an idea in your head, I'm concentrating things about reality that I want you to be paying attention to. I'm saying, hey, feel this. Think of this thing right now.
Abstractions.
Yeah. And those things can be lies. They can be inaccurate representations of reality, or they can be the truth, accurate
Like
representation.
now? No, I'm kidding.
And the really, really good liars and manipulators of the world are those that are especially skilled at taking inaccurate representations of reality and making you believe that they're accurate, essentially, right? Tricking
Mm.
you intellectually and emotionally. And really, really honest people like me, the irony of me, like I said before, I'm somewhat of a divisive person. People have called me manipulative for things that were the exact opposite of that, like for holding them accountable to the truth. They call that manipulative, which essentially all I'm doing
Well,
is,
you're kind of manipulating their consciousness um to see their errors.
if
Like
by manipulation you
it's
mean
too hard
influencing or affecting, yes, everything is influence, right?
like because if I'm understanding correctly, what they want to do is evade responsibility, and you're almost with your words somehow stopping their mind from evading. I know you can't
Right.
fully stop
Yes.
someone from evading, but it's like they don't have a way out if they listen to your words. Their only
Exactly.
way out would be jamming their ears and blocking out the thing, or
Essentially, I'm
figuring out
saying,
how
hey,
to
pay
block it
attention to
mentally.
this thing you don't want to pay attention to, even though this
Cognitive
thing is
dissonance, that's
true,
it.
right? This thing is accurate. This is what happened. This is what's real. Pay attention to this. No, Gregory, you're manipulating me.
Yeah, that's their way out, to
Right.
refuse to pay attention.
But in
Is
reality, by
what it sounds like
denying
anyway.
it, they're manipulating both themselves and anyone they communicate with about this thing by like saying this thing didn't happen or this isn't real, right? That's manipulation because now you're misrepresenting reality. And what I'm doing is really the opposite. It's like hyper representing reality. It's like extra infusing it with reality, like mythology, like those stories. No, this is fucking real. Pay attention to how real this is. It's like that scene in The Simpsons with the army recruiter when he says they have Subliminal, liminal, and superliminal marketing for the army. You know the scene I'm talking about? No, the Navy. It was the Navy.
It's been a long time. Was this the Ivan
Yes.
Etnioj
So
episode?
the even etniage, that was the subliminal messaging. Join the Navy backward, hidden in songs. And liminal
Which
is just
lit backwards is not join the Navy. It's spell that's the spelling backwards,
but
but the
audibly it's not,
pronunciation is
phonetically it's
very
not.
off.
Yeah. And then
Neoj, that is clearly not join backwards. It would be more like noij.
yeah, I never
Join,
thought about that.
noij. Yeah, neoj.
But the example he gives of superliminal influencing would be he just sticks his head out the window and says, "Hey, you, join the Navy." Okay, like pay attention to this thing. That's what I do. That's me. They call that manipulative, right?
They just can't deal with you shining that much of a light on reality.
Right. But of course, the only reason I have to do that, or at least that I tell myself I have to do it. Maybe you can make the argument that I'm wrong, right? But the reason I act that way and feel I have to act that way is because it is so underrepresented, right? It is so ignored, so hidden in the dark that it requires an extra infusion of light and attention to bring it up to the level it should have been at, right? I'm compensating for other people's ignorance and denial of something that's real and what I consider to be important. It's a little bit like the Black Lives Matter thing. So I can see both sides of the argument of the Black Lives Matter and the All Lives Matter debate that was really popular a few years ago. When was that? I don't know. I lose
That was
track of all
annoying.
these internet trends, right? And I can see both sides of it, right? Like, why do you need to specifically say that Black Lives Matter? If you're just saying that all lives matter, doesn't that include Black lives, right? But the point they're making is that yes, but this one needs extra attention because these ones are being more ignored. Yes, all lives matter, but not nearly as many people are neglecting that fact about certain other types of lives. Now, whether or not that's true, like I don't know the statistics on, on whether people are ignoring that or not, right? I don't want to get into that.
Yeah,
It's
it's
not
not
something I
clear
care
to
about.
me, but it does seem like there may be a problem with the police in that way in the US.
Yeah,
It's
I'm sure there is.
I wouldn't
Yeah.
be I wouldn't be willing to assert it, but
Right,
it kind of
exactly. I
seems like
wouldn't
that.
feel confident enough to make some kind of hard stance about the statistics of racism against black people in particular. I'm more a fan of all cops are bastards because that just kind of encapsulates that the problem is just with them being cops, not against a particular type of person, right? But I can see the point at least when what they're trying to do by kind of over-representing, like this is a thing you need to pay attention to, right? Because not enough people are paying attention to this thing that is real and important. Superliminal. Join the Navy. So when you think of advertising of any kind of logo, any kind of brand identity, any kind of symbol or imagery, it's a concentration of an idea, an association, an emotion. If you sell food, you want people to think of you when they're hungry. You want your logo and your color scheme to be a concentrated representation of what the experience of eating your food is like. When my readers think of me, I want them to be thinking, oh, that guy's a really deep, introspective writer who explains things in this really dynamic, precise way that I've never seen before, like that. I mean, I hope that's what most of my writers think. I know readers think. I know some of them do, but I can't be sure that that's what most of them do because I don't directly interact with most of them, right? But that would be an idea. It's like a concentration, a representation of who I am, the most important parts of me, at least. Because, of course, I'm also a lot of other things too. But, like, does my preference for different types of fruit matter in the domain of like what you think of me as an author? Do I have to say, well, I prefer green apples compared to red apples? Is that that's a selection bias. And my brand as an author, that's not something you need to know. It's not part of the relevant concentrated truth that I'm working on.
I like the Dorian, which means I can tolerate high levels of
Yeah.
disgust.
Although maybe that is an essential part of my character, the fact that I love durian because a lot of people find it disgusting. Yeah. Maybe, right? I could put that.
Because
I
they
put in my
can't
author
get
bio that I
past the
like
smell.
cats, right? Because I consider that an important part of my personality, right? You should know what kind of person I am. I like cats, right? So it's up to you to decide
You should
how
put, and
fluent.
they love me.
Yeah, and cats love me too. You decide what's relevant for people to know about you, the relevant concentrated truth of you or your business. If you ever hear that phrase, like, don't meet your heroes because you'll be disappointed.
I've heard that, yeah.
Why is that true? I won't say it's always true, but it's often true. It's sometimes true. Why is that true? Think
Well,
about it.
how you conceive of your heroes is an abstraction, it's an archetype of them, whereas in reality, they are everything about them, flaws and all,
Yes, your
warts
hero,
and all.
the celebrity worship of any kind, is you just paying attention to the relevant concentrated aspects of them in a particular domain. A famous singer or actor or military general.
All that said, I bet Keanu is as cool as the stories make him out to be in general.
Well, you're already bringing in extra information. You know lots of personal information about this person. You've heard lots of stories about him that go beyond just, oh, he's a really good actor. He's really cool in that action movie, right? So that's already expanding the brand narrative of him. When you have hero worship for someone of any kind, and you're usually just focusing on the things you know about them, the things they've produced and spread into the world, and your mind might fill in the rest of the story about them, saying, well, what kind of person would I expect to have made this type of art or be known for this type of thing or scored so many touchdowns over their life, right? And then if you actually meet them, you're seeing all the other truths about them that aren't condensed into that brand image, and that might be disappointing. And it's manipulative if these people try to make it seem like the concentrated, relevant truth is the whole story, right? Like to try to glorify themselves as superhuman somehow. Like that's all there is to me, all these amazing things I did, and forget all my vices, my drinking problem, and that I'm bad at math or that I'm kind of an asshole sometimes. Those things aren't true. Only this image I've created about myself is true. That what I would say is manipulative because it doesn't have to be manipulative for you to communicate a concentrated image as long as you're honest that that's not the whole story. That's just the relevant part right now, right? I'm a lot of things beyond just what people might know about me, but I never pretended that the things they know about me are all there is to me. So it's not dishonest, it's not manipulative.
If you're selling a product or a handful of products, why is it important to have a brand identity rather than just here are my products, here's what they do, buy them or don't?
That's not how people think about relationships. A brand is a type of pseudo relationship. You don't just buy things in a vacuum, you buy them from someone who made them, someone who has a certain standard of quality, who has certain goals, certain skill level.
So there's a trust element to it. If you believe in them, you'll believe more that their product does what it says. It will hold up, stand the test of
Right. And that is how
time.
companies work because companies are run by people, right? And that's what influences how the company will operate and the quality that they provide. If you change CEOs or even employees, sometimes you could drastically affect the quality of it.
Anti-obsolescent products you won't need to just get rid of and replace in a brief period of time. Products you can rely on.
I would say, I think the principle you're trying to get at is that the more variety there is in a market, the more developed the market, the more specificity and differentiation matters. And that includes the reputation of the person, the entity producing things. If there's only one restaurant in town, that's your only option. If there are hundreds of restaurants, each serving a slightly different type or quality of food with a different atmosphere in a different location, all of these things contribute to each one's brand image. And you have to trust that the people running that restaurant or whatever the business is are going to be able to consistently deliver on that image of value that you've come to
Right.
associate with them. If a Big Mac was different in every McDonald's you went to, you would lose your idea of what a Big Mac was supposed to taste like. or even if just
I think they
the
actually
layout.
do differ across
They
countries.
do.
I've heard
There are
like
different
might be
menus at least. I
India
don't
or
know. I
something.
haven't eaten like Big Macs in Japan or something, but I know there are different menu items at least in different countries. But that's also possible. Yeah, even the same menu items might be made with different ingredients or something. But at least, that wouldn't affect most people because most people aren't hopping across countries to try different McDonald's. Most people live in one localized area, or they might.
And there'll still, you'd hope, be thematic similarities, so it
Yeah,
still feels um like you're buying a similar experience sort of thing.
yeah. And even just like the layout of the restaurant when you go inside. I know what a McDonald's should look or feel like when I'm in there. That's part of my brand image association of being in a McDonald's. It's not just the food itself, it's everything about the experience of interacting with it. If I suddenly changed the tone of my writing drastically, whatever the subject was, people would feel like this doesn't feel like Gregory. This betrays my image, my expectation of what this writer is and how what reading his book is like, right? Same thing.
You have 12 main chapters in this book, and then some extra unchaptered stuff after.
Well, the first section is obvious why identity matters. You have to start with that. You have to, well, Simon Sinek wrote a book called Start With Why. And incidentally, some readers have compared my writing style to his. I don't think I've actually read Start With Why. Maybe I should. But that's essentially what I'm
Maybe you should
doing here.
start with why.
Yes, thank you. Why identity matters, that sets, of course, the tone for everything because why should I go on this deep, introspective, reflective journey of thinking about who I am and what my business is unless I understand why that's important? Why shouldn't I just be content with a logo and a color scheme? Why instead go deeper? That's what that is about. And then it goes into, of course, section 2, creating your brand
Because
identity, how you do that, like the types of questions you need to go over to figure out what your business is all about. And then section 3, telling your story to the world. Okay, I know who I am. How do I communicate it? And I guess maybe even I should take some lessons from that because, as I said, a lot of people have a very inaccurate idea of what kind of person I am. And so, is that my fault for doing a poor job communicating, or is it their fault for just being shitty listeners? It could be both, it could be one or the other.
which is the most technically specific section, the most focused on the details of
Uh,
what you're doing rather than the overlying general abstractions.
Well, section 3, telling your story to the world, is probably where it gets most into specific advice about like what to do, like how to write good copy, how to educate people well with your writing. Um, and then there's some case studies that follow that, so I guess that might be more specific, but um, it goes from vague, general, philosophical, introspective to more and more specific and applicable as the book goes on. Which of course was one of the criticisms I got for the book was that there wasn't enough practical advice. It was too like philosophical and deep. But I would say that that's again one of my unique factors as an author. That's part of my brand image.
Is that a
Is
bit of a case of people wanting you to write a book other than the book you chose to write? It's like, hey,
right,
your book doesn't do this thing I wanted from a book. Give me what I want and
right.
not write what you want to write.
So that would be a question of again, how well does the book communicate what it is? How well does it set expectations? If it promises to be a shallow, practical book and ends up being really deep and philosophical, well, then it didn't communicate well. So you're justified in being upset. But if a book says this is what kind of book this is, and you just didn't pay attention to that, then again, that just makes you a shitty listener, right? But a lot of people have, of course, prejudices and biases. They think, oh, well, a book on sales and branding, I know what that should be like. That's going to be like every other book on sales and branding I've ever read. A book on travel, I know what that's going to be like. And maybe that's what some of the people do with me as an individual too. Maybe they think, oh, well, I know what a cocky American is like, or I don't know, whatever
This
stereotypical
is
image
what
and
the
category they're
back
putting me
cover
in.
is for, right? This is
That's
what
where,
the
yeah.
description on the back cover is for, right?
But it's
Do you
not just
think
that.
for each of your books you've done it well? Craft the text on the back cover to make it clear
Yeah,
to someone buying your book that this is what you're getting into. This is the real deal. I'm not just giving you micro tools sort of thing. I'm giving you um, overlying general abstractions or underlying something like that that cover things on a deep level. This isn't shallow. This isn't just some like technical how-to guide. It's overarching. It's got weight to it.
I think there are two important qualities that go into something like a book description, or even just the title and subtitle, or anything about the book. One is, does it accurately convey what the book is, like describing as accurately as possible what's it going to be like, the tone and the content. And then two, generating interest, which we might call the more manipulative of the two, because it can't just be,
Manipulative.
yeah, it's not really manipulative unless
If
you're
you do
doing
it
it.
right, it's
If you just give a flat description saying, here's what's in this book, for most people, that's not going to generate curiosity and interest. So instead, you might want to start by asking questions like, oh, have you ever thought about blah, blah, blah? Do you want to be the type of person who blah, blah, those questions are just there to grab your attention and
so they're
generate
already
interest.
starting to go along with you rather than it's just you throwing stuff at them. Like if you ask them questions and pique their curiosity, they're already starting to head along the journey with you, something like that.
Mhm. Yes, it gives them a reason to read the rest of the description, which eventually, of course, gives them a reason to buy the book and read it. Again, that's just selecting relevant bits of information designed for a particular emotional response. That's an image. That's what questions and superliminal exclamations are good for. Getting your attention, making you pay attention, making you want to learn more, making you take certain actions based on emotional responses. That's all sales and marketing. That's all storytelling. That's all image building of any kind. So you can do that responsibly, or you can do that maliciously, manipulatively.
Your version of drink responsibly, brand responsibly.
Yeah. Story tell responsibly, image build responsibly. Everything's an image. So yeah, image build responsibly. And yeah, and
Represent responsibly.
it begins again with your self-image. You have a responsibility to yourself to have as accurate conception as possible of what kind of person you are. And I believe, I don't want to do armchair psychiatry here, but I believe one of the core defining aspects of many antisocial personality disorders, such as narcissism, is the inability to self reflect. And when that happens, when you cut off your ability to think about what kind of person you are and question the things you think about yourself, I think it's a foregone conclusion that the more time goes on, the more distant your idea of yourself will get from reality because you can't course correct. We're all going to make mistakes
Damn.
eventually. It's like getting injured. It's at some point your body's going to have
Speak
to
for
initiate
yourself,
a
mate.
healing process. And so if you cannot self-reflect and say, "Wait, did I make a mistake somewhere? Am I being the person I think I am? Is my image of myself correct?" Eventually you just float off the ground into your own little imaginary land of what kind of person you are. And if you're a great manipulator, a great salesman, you might convince
Self
people that
delusion
that's who you
bubble.
are. Yeah, you might delude other people. You might bring them into your delusion bubble, which is why such types of
Ah, the
people,
bubble metaphor expands.
like narcissistic people, are deathly afraid of any kind of criticism or inquiry or confrontation because it's like threatening to pop their bubble, right? And so they typically like push away immediately, excommunicate anyone who threatens the bubble of delusion they've built for themselves and the people in their life, right? And so all of that is
Cult leader sort of thing. Are all
cult
cult
leader is
are all cult
exceptionally
leaders
good at
narcissists?
yeah, a cult leader I would say is exceptionally good at convincing other people of the story they've told. Whether or not they actually believe the story, I think is what would make it narcissism, because it could be that they're willfully lying to other people, telling a story that they themselves don't believe. They could just be liars and con men, right? Or they could really believe what they're selling, that I am God, I am whatever, right? Now you all must worship me and give me all your money. I bet you weren't expecting we were going to connect cult leaders and narcissists to a book on brand identity for small businesses. But see, that's the kind of writer I am. I make those connections and I go those places. You're not going to find that in most other branding books, I think. I think the biggest thing I want people to walk away from a book like this with is realizing that having a sense of like purpose and meaning in what you do in your business is not antithetical to selling more. In fact, depending on how you're doing your business, it may be crucial to it. That the more deep and purposeful and specific you get, the more attractive your products and services become to a specific type of person. Unless you're going for quantity over quality or depth or meaning, like just pump out a million widgets, which is why I think I don't like big business and corporate takes on these things, because it's the focus is so different. It's, how do we sell as many units as possible to a wide base of people?
So you're trying to then, if I'm understanding right, sell people on being as specific as possible, not just try to sell to as wide an audience as possible, but narrow down your audience and deliver more strongly to them. Make what you're selling more of a thing, sort of thing, more what it is, more of an A that's its own A.
It's like refining the reality you represent and
Refining,
control
that's the
you
word.
produce to the greatest extreme possible, making the value as specific and meaningful as you can. That's like the burden of the artist or the creator of any kind. To do something that no one else can or would have done, basically. That's where uniqueness and meaning come from. If you're in an industry where people kind of just have one established way of doing things, maybe that's a sign that it's like, hey, maybe I can introduce a change here that no one's thought of or would think of. And that's where I'll get my
Gap in the
success.
market.
Yeah. I do that all the time with lifestyle experiments, like uh, growing crops here at my house that no one else in the country is probably growing. Building techniques. We're building earth bag houses, which is like this, alternative building style that I don't think anyone here has ever done. But if I can be one of the first people to do it and show others how to do it, I'm contributing something of unique value to the culture and the livelihood of people,
Pioneer.
right? The value of anything has to be understood in comparison to the other options available. If something is already common and well known
If
and no
there
one has
are
other
other options
options,
available.
yeah, then it's not valuable for you to just do more of the same of what's already there. So it's always contextual and subjective, the value of anything you do.
Sort of a diminishing returns, but instead of across time, like for one person consuming something, it's across sort of the world for like the return a business could expect by being more of the same that's already there.
Hmm. Yeah.
Diminishing returns across space. I don't know.
The more society develops, the more burden there is on you to be something meaningful, I guess you could say. In the same way that I was just saying that the more an economy and a market develops, the more pressure and necessity there is for every product and service to be different and better in some specific way than what exists.
So maybe someday we'll see 7 billion people standing out from the crowd, or however many it is, both within themselves and how they are able to project their brand identity.
Yes, a world where everybody is confidently self-expressed at the deepest level possible and not limited by what society rewards them for being or the categories that it readily places them in. That's the world that I think we're inevitably heading toward if we don't destroy ourselves in a nuclear fire, which is also always
There's
possible,
always that
of
if we
course.
don't destroy ourselves,
One or the
catch
one
to
or the other, basically. A world of confidently self-expressed individuals or total destruction.